So, yes, I hail from the big city, New York City Public Schools, formerly known as New York City Department of Education. I am in my 25th year with our organization, and I have served as a teacher and as a principal. And now I am serving as the Senior Citywide Director for Social Emotional Learning and Design. And I have a wonderful partnership with Harmony, and I love how Denise elevated a lot of that. um, and so I do support hundreds of our schools with the implementation of that particular program, but there's a tremendous amount of stuff that comes out of this organization. So just to give you a little background for those of you who may not be familiar with New York City, we have approximately 1 million students that we serve across the 5 boroughs of New York City. We have about 1,800 schools that cater to students from pre-K or 3K, I should say, that goes all the way up to high school, servicing young people to the age of 21. We have transfer school students, we have suspension sites. So it's a real gamut of services that of students that we serve around New York City. Um, and so our schools, because the community is so large, we have a total of 45, what I will describe as sub-school districts, 45 superintendents. And so that's inclusive of 32 what they call community school districts that cater to students in that pre-K through grade 8 population. And then we have our actual high schools, high school districts, where there are several around the 5 boroughs that make up our 45. And so for New York City, in my particular office, I work for the Office of Safety and Youth Development. And so there are several members of our team that oversee various bodies of work. So out of the Office of Safety and Youth Development comes everything from restorative practices and restorative justice programming, which we target our students in grades 6 through 12 with that programming across the city, where we have about 175 schools that actually have coordinators and directors that support those schools. We have a comfort dog program. So we have about 50 schools across New York City that actually have dogs who are part of the community, who are part of supporting young people. We have a lot of schools that use PBIS programming. We have a lot of schools that definitely use our Harmony program. And I would say at this point, we're probably close to about 650 schools that have actually been trained in the program. And I would say that's probably more than 5,000 staff members, ranging from principals, assistant principals, paraprofessionals, or also known as teacher assistants, guidance counselors, social workers, and of course, teachers. And and so there's so many different entry points when it comes to the multi-tiered systems of support that are offered at the city level. And so I want to just kind of take a moment to speak about just my own journey when it comes to SEL. And as Tom mentioned, that prior to being with this office, I served as a principal for 12 years in Harlem. And what I can tell you is that there's not a lot of places like New York City. I would dare to say there's no place like New York City, and I love Harlem. There's no place like Harlem. Harlem is like Harlem, USA. It's like a whole country in and of itself. And so, like most of you here, you have the variety of young people that enter your school. And for me, it was certainly a different type of connection in that the majority of the children who attended my school look like me. And so it was a very personal connection. And I saw it as a very personal investment when it comes to supporting young people of color and wanting them to succeed and wanting the best for them. But I would be remiss if I didn't speak about how culture, right, plays a part in how you support children, right? And so for me, speaking locally and immediately, um, a lot of my cultural upbringing, and some of you will be able to fill in the blanks. And if you can fill in these blanks, drop it in the chat. I come from a culture when it comes to discipline that a hard head makes a soft fill in the blank. And children are to be seen and not fill in the blank, right? And so I see some head nods and some smiles, right? So I can see that there's some people who can relate. Marie, I see you. Okay. Right. I'm like, you was raised down the block on Fifth Avenue. Okay. So Miss Rivers is giving me the heart. So there was a lot of that I carried with me into the role as a principal. And what I found about myself and just this self-awareness, and it didn't come right away. But after like this major food fight, my third day as a principal, I went on this rampage of just wanting to make sure that there was order. And part of me maintaining order was utilizing my power, right, as the principal. And part of that power was having the ability to suspend students. And so I was on this rampage of suspending students, right, as a means of trying to maintain order. And after about, I'm going to say 2 or 3 years of that, when my suspension rates had got up to 28%, I made this discovery that I was teaching my staff that our children were disposable. And that wasn't my intention because I love children. I had been working with children since I was a little girl. And so I always think it's important to speak about the work of the leader when it comes to the culture shift that people say they want to see in their schools. Because if the leader cannot do that vulnerability work and that self-reflection work, then you see pockets of things, but you don't see the real transformation that you're looking for. And so once I was able to actually vocalize and speak to where my shortcomings were and who I needed to become, before I sent anybody out for any professional development around how to improve our relationships with kids, I participated in professional development. And so I took a 6-week course entitled Life Space Crisis Intervention. And that was my what I would describe as my journey in understanding all of these resources when it comes to social emotional learning supports that are actually available. And so life space crisis intervention, also therapeutic crisis intervention, is another type of course that actually trains educators in how to relate to students, relate to young people, as opposed to trying to fix them. And it reinforces what I will describe as self-regulatory skills, as opposed to feeling like you have the responsibility of trying to change someone else, because we don't hold that type of power. And so as I made this transition, what I would describe from using my legitimate power, my coercive power, to more of a referent, right, and relational type of approach, the shift started happening within my community. And so I found my teachers wanting to really work with young people and try to figure out collectively how to support them, as opposed to disposing of them. And so by the time I left my school 12 years later, our suspension rates were down to 4%. And we had seen a 26% increase in student achievement when it came to literacy. And so when people talk about, does SEL work, right? And what does it do beyond just the behavior? When the behaviors are intact, children are in a better and a safer space to learn. And when I talk about the behaviors, I'm not just talking about the children, I'm also talking about the adults. So with that, I want to speak about the pandemic, and when the pandemic hit us, and how this relationship that we had formulated with Harmony had started in 2019. It was before the pandemic hit, and we were really looking at a lot of data, right, to see which schools would benefit the best. And my colleague Laura and I were kind of targeting certain schools that we wanted to support to consider adopting, the Harmony program, to support schools to improve infractions or reduce infractions and lessen suspension rates and allow parents and teachers and students to have a better view of what was happening in their schools. And so what we found was, so sorry, quiet, Mary. What we found was that when the pandemic hit, we didn't have to go to look for anybody. The people started coming to us. And I think that says something about the type of investment that people knew that they were ready to make for themselves and for young people when people start coming for the learning, right? And wanting to figure out how to relate to kids, because we were all in the same even playing field, right? That we were all struggling during the pandemic, and everybody was wanting resources to figure out how to improve relationships with their young people. And so what we started to discovering and just coming together as a collective, we started looking at what were all of our multi-tiered systems of support that came out of our office, and how did we leverage these different resources and really make sure that we were doing more targeted support to keep young people feeling emotionally safe. And so that work of emotional safety, because we always, when we think safety, we're talking about physical safety, but what did it mean what did it look like for children to be emotionally safe coming back from the screen, from behind the screens, and then now back into the classroom setting? And I love talking to adults, but young people is where it's at. And so for me, hearing young people speak about their fear of removing their mask, right, because of the losses that they had experienced, hearing young people speak about the fear of even being in close proximity to their peers, right? There's a lot of deconstructing of the mind, right, and deconditioning that we had to do for both our young people as well as for our staff. And so one of the partnerships that we had developed was through the Center for Trauma and Stress Education, where we did professional work with our staff, right? Where for 6 weeks they could come and actually speak about what their experiences were and learn different techniques for managing stress. That's creating emotionally safe spaces, because when adults feel like they have the space to do that, then they are better equipped to create those spaces for young people. For the first time following the pandemic, when summer school came back into place, we actually had our officials looking for SEL to be incorporated in summer planning. And so now, Harmony sent resources, all kinds of kits. We partnered with Morningside Center for Children and Families. They provided a plethora of professional development. And so we had all of these different resources that allowed for things to be seamless, so that as the school year transitioned and now we were in summer school, that there was still this continuity of understanding that the SEL work is important. And so now SEL is actually a standard practice. We're back to, and I'm using air quotes, the normal, but where we're fully back, in person doing this work. And now summer school has SEL structures in place for professional, for summer school for students. And so one of the things that I think is important for all of us to understand, that regardless of the program, right, that is being used, or the framework that is in place when it comes to creating affirming environments for young people, that all of the work and everything that we do, it involves social emotional skills. And And so when I'm speaking with school leaders or my colleagues, and when I hear, well, we do this during this time, or we don't have time to do this, or we don't know when this is supposed to fit. Um, I'm My question is, when doesn't it fit? Right? Because the program is just a tool, right, to teach a concept, the way a math curriculum teaches a concept, the way a literacy program teaches the concept. But I always speak about, one, who's behind the teaching, because the program and the curriculum is not the teacher, the human being is the teacher. And so, the same way that when we're speaking to young people about anything that they're doing over the course of the day, right? Math lives everywhere, literacy lives everywhere. And so SEL lives everywhere. And so it's not a time for it. The time is, if it is not a specific time, the time is all the time. And so I think as we begin to just kind of deconstruct people's understanding of what this looks like, and not having an expectation for children to be perfect because they've participated in a lesson, right, or an activity, but instead, how do we support young people? And I almost said it, but I'm glad I caught myself. I almost said, how do we hold people accountable? But I don't, but accountability kind of sometimes can have like a negative connotation to it. But instead, how do I encourage it during the times when it's not happening in an explicit period, right? In an explicit moment. How do you remind young people about what they did if they were engaged in a buddy up activity, and how you applauded the way they interacted with their peer, that you want them to carry that same behavior when they're in recess, right? And so I think when we're thinking about this work of what we want to see in young people, I think the bigger body of work is when it comes to us as adults in the adult SEL work. And because we're the ones that are more rigid and have been more cemented in the way we show up in spaces, right, Camilla? And so the idea of, how do we do that vulnerable work that it takes to say, I know this is what the people around me, I know this is what the ancestors did. I know this is the way that I was raised. I know that this is what it was like when I first started teaching. I know this is what it was like in my experience as a student. And to say, but I want to, and I'm willing to do something different. And so I guess in closing, that the bottom line, when I look at this work, and when we promote this work in our office, SEL is the plate, and everything else that sits on, it's a big plate, but everything else that sits on the plate, whether it's Harmony, whether it's RJ, whether it's Comfort Dogs, whether it's counseling supports, whether it's Second Step, whatever programs, whatever frameworks that are being used, right? That it all sits in those competencies of social emotional learning. And so with that, I say thank you.
Dr. Green, we appreciate you sharing your passion that it's exemplified from the moment you hopped on, and part of your journey as well. So one question for you. I see Rhonda put in the chat, and man, I think we could probably dive into this one for hours, right? So let's get a minute or so, because I want to get Rhonda's question in. How do we remind ourselves to hold space to notice social and emotional skills in our environment?
The first thing that's coming up for me, Rhonda, is the word grace. And I think grace is coming up for me because we're going to make mistakes. We're not going to get it right. And so I think it's the work of there's that voice that sits inside every single one of us, that when we're doing something that we know is the right thing, it feels good, right? And we know when we're not doing the right thing, right? What it feels like, right? I'm not going to give that the adjective, but you know what it feels like. For me, it's like, girl, you know better, right? Whether in whatever place I'm coming from. And so I think it's the idea of giving ourselves grace and then seeing this as intentional work, that this is just not doesn't happen haphazardly, right? But that there's a part of us that has to wake up saying how we want to show up. And I don't think it's any different than when we hold ourselves accountable. And this time I will use this word, right? To say, no, I'm going to the gym because I have a goal of what I want to achieve when it comes to my health, right? I think that if we apply that same way of thinking when it comes to social emotional skills in the environment, it's going in with the intention. When I took that life space crisis intervention class and I started really trying to apply, right, those skills, it was not easy. And that's why I say grace is important, because it doesn't happen overnight. But I will tell you that it was hard. It took a long time. And I had to be patient with myself. And so that's the other part of grace, right? Patience with yourself, patience with the mistakes, patience of wanting to default, right, back into an old habit, and knowing that even if you fall back because you've had success at doing it better, because I will tell you, I was not doing it perfectly, right? And there were days where I was like, this kid did what? That's a suspension. And my teachers had to be the ones to say, no, Dr. Green, we're not going to suspend Tyrone, but we have a plan. But that's when I knew that the work had connected, because it was outside of me. The other adults who normally would have been jumped on that bandwagon had now adopted my new way of thinking. So it's not to say that we're not going to make mistakes. It's not to say we're not going to fall back, but it's saying, let's be intentional about who we say we want to be when it comes to how we show up for young people.
All right, Dr. Green, I got one more question for you. I'm going to give you 30 seconds or less.
Okay.
One practical tip, because I got a lot of private messages in these things. Got a couple of new administrators here, newer principals. So I'm assuming maybe first year, first couple of months, give them like a must do from your principal experience of like for the rest of the year, kind of what's a must do or a quick hit or a quick win or something. If you were walking in their shoes into a new building, what would you do? Give me one or two things. 30 seconds.
Stay out of your office. Walk to school all day. Stay out of your office.